I think we might be at the age of the go-go software themes and just jumping into stuff. That's very good for Bitcoin. So the people that watch this for Bitcoin, you actually want a situation where people are making 15% a year in the stock market on boring stuff as opposed to making 15% on the sexy stuff while the boring stuff's not moving. And the reason is because Bitcoin is not a boring thing. And that means that the competition for it, if you view it as it's a high-end thing, it's caviar of investments, and well, you want other caviar to not be working so that you only have one thing to go to. And that's why I really do believe this is the network effect year for Bitcoin.
What's going on, guys? Today we got a great conversation with Jordy Visser. In this conversation, we break down what's going on with Bitcoin. Why does it have the only defensible moat in the world? What Jordy's thinking about AI, the recent sentiment changes happening in the market, how stocks are doing. Should you actually be excited or should you be worried? What he thinks is going to happen through the rest of this year, how things like the economic policies of the Trump administration are playing out all over financial markets, and many, many more topics that I think you guys will enjoy. This conversation, as every conversation I have with Jordy, is packed with insights. So I hope you enjoy it. Here's my latest conversation with Jordy Visser. Jordy, I thought a great place to start the conversation this week is this idea of Bitcoin being the moat, right? Like there's all these different technologies, all these different sectors, all these different companies that they all claim to have a moat, but in a acceleration of tech innovation, those moats really get tested. But it seems like Bitcoin continues to stand out by itself. You've got some thoughts here. Explain.
Yeah, the phrase I've used is there's only three true moats that I know of. Gold is one that's working. Religion lasted 2,000 years, not going anywhere, and Bitcoin. And it kind of freaks people out to think about that because then they go back and, well, what about, and they can name whatever company they want. Companies are ideas that have turned into something to be monetized. But in a world of exponential innovation and exponential change, if you believe in that, and you believe that we're now entering a world with artificial intelligence, that we now have the ability of creating almost instantaneous competition, well, then you want to find the things that can survive the test of time. I think even behind the scenes as to why gold is doing so well right now, gold is outside of the system. You and I have talked about where we are with the debt, what's going on with Trump's policies. The whole framework of the world is kind of changing. And at a minimum, people are like, well, is U.S. debt, am I going to get paid? Are we going to restructure it? I just need to have more gold. I need to have more security. And the reason Bitcoin at this point has not reached the same level as gold as a completely outside the system is because it is a technology. It is an innovation. But in the end, if you believe, as I do, that the S&P 500, the lifespan of a company is down to about 15 years, with AI that will continue to decline, then what innovation is going to be here no matter what? And that's why Bitcoin at the end of the day, when it surpasses the market cap of the Mag 7, I think it's reached that point of it has a moat just like gold. And I think that'll happen this year. And that Bitcoin moat, how much of that is being furthered by governments embracing it, regulation, like these things that are not technology, right? Technology is very clear. My favorite stat is always if you take Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, all their computing power, and you put it together, it's less than 1% of the whole Bitcoin network. That's a technical moat. That's a network moat that is not going to be very easily overcome. But there does seem to be these like almost soft moats in a weird way where like Bitcoin is entered into the mental or like the mind share, and people look at it as, okay, that's the one that gets the strategic Bitcoin reserve. These other assets don't, right? So how do you think about that? So if you go back to gold and religion, those are stories. Those are beliefs that people have run with and decided. And so I think it was Stan Druckenmiller that said, you can't argue the fact that Bitcoin is a brand. Well, a brand at this point means there's some story attached to it. So it's not just governments that are adopting it. It's not just corporations. It's not just individuals. But at the end of the day, when you really look and you're like, well, what's happening? The voters are voting. It's become something important in politics. I think it had a huge impact on the election this year because they embraced it and Donald Trump was smart to embrace it. So part of this whole thing of a moat is actually human beings just accepting it as that. And the longer that something works, the longer that it outperforms. And I've said this before, I think the only reason that wealthier people in the markets and high net worth individuals haven't embraced Bitcoin as much as they would have, given the performance where everyone's a performance chaser, is because they haven't needed to. So to use that Michael Saylor line, you don't find Bitcoin, Bitcoin finds you. Well, eventually this year at the golf course, if Bitcoin's up 25% year to date and the Mag 7 are down 15 and continuing to struggle, I think at that point, you don't realize that there's nothing else that you can buy that can compete with that kind of return in technology, because I think AI is now becoming a disruptive force to all technology companies.
And when you look at that AI disruption that's occurring, where are we kind of in this cycle? Because I think that if you go back to end of last year, AI can do no wrong. It's the golden child. It's going to continue going up. It feels like there's been some softening. It started with the DeepSeek development out of China. There's a lot of people paying attention to China now, but you're also seeing it, with the CoreWeave IPO and a number of these different components. So maybe walk us through like what's happening with this like sentiment change that seems to be playing out over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, this is, I didn't think this would happen this fast. I thought this year would be about the Mag 7 underperforming, but there's a real sentiment change happening. And I think for investors that are now starting to watch this on a weekly basis, this is probably the most important thing that's starting to become clear. It started with DeepSeek. So what DeepSeek did is question, okay, China's not that far behind us. So instead of saying China, let's just say competition. We thought there was a race ahead and the Mag 7 had this huge advantage. They don't. So when you have a tiny little place with less than 1,000 employees, and I think DeepSeek has 160 to 200 employees, and they're able to do what they did, regardless of how they did it, and regardless of how much money they spent, they were able to do it. I think this shook up a lot of people's confidence, and that's when NVIDIA started to break down. Well, since then, you've had Satya Nadella say this race to AGI makes no sense to him. So Microsoft has again been pulling back on data center leases, but he's been very open about, I don't think racing towards this commoditized product makes sense. So now you have one of the hyperscalers saying, I'm kind of out. And they're spending, but he's clearly made a decision that he wants to make it more on the application side. Huawei has chips that are coming out that are competing with NVIDIA. Now you've got this question on whether they're there. You mentioned CoreWeave. I think we may have entered a period when you look at the S&P 500, which has done fine this year. It's only down a few percent. But the Mag 7 have been hit hard. I think the reality is those companies are fine. Their earnings are going to grow, but they're spending a lot of money. And the question is, 3 years from now, will the competition be so extreme that their valuation and all tech companies are there? So we're having this divergence where the hardware and the software are kind of merging. So AI embodiment is a theme that we talked about last week, but there's another angle here too, which is healthcare stocks are doing very well. We're going to be spending a lot of money on healthcare, and you can't replace the healthcare side with AI. So it's not a competition. It's actually an adoption story. Financials have been regulated heavily. They're going to be deregulated. They're going to benefit from the AI adoption side. They're doing well. And then when you add in energy and utilities for the power side, I think the interesting themes are about the late adopters, and the early adopters are under extreme pressure and competition from AI. So I think that's a theme that's starting to play out in front of our eyes.
The thing with the AI, so I recently tweeted a story where I had a friend, they went to the doctor. The doctor gave them a very, very concerning high-risk diagnosis. That high-risk diagnosis, they were obviously upset. They go home, they take the scans, they upload them into ChatGPT. ChatGPT ends up telling them something different, which there was still something there, but it was nowhere near as high risk. And that person then takes the scan, draws some arrows on the scan, uploads it into the doctor's portal, and basically was like, hey, what am I looking at here? Didn't say anything about AI, but just was like, out of curiosity, what is this? And basically the doctor called and was fairly embarrassed and was like, hey, I don't know what I was looking at. I think that A, B, and C is true now. And so there's two things that I think I took away from that situation. One was, how many misdiagnoses, how many, issues are there in the traditional system? But two was, wow, these systems are pretty good, right? And this was just like your kind of average use of ChatGPT. It wasn't a model that was trained specifically for medical use or anything like that. And so I posted this. And you know what I was most surprised by? How many doctors or medical professionals that, are on Twitter or on Instagram, whatever, reached out to me and said, and almost were bragging about how they're trying to incorporate AI into their practices because they realized that this technology is really powerful. And one doctor in particular was basically saying, we're trying to use it as a double check of everything that we're doing already, because we don't want the patient to go home and do it. So we'd rather just do it here and make sure that us and the AIs are aligned. And I was just like blown away as to how quickly these things are infiltrating into these systems. And that is just in healthcare. You go through all these different industries and it feels like, hey, we may have just as many kind of software employees within the next 2 or 3 years working at these companies than human employees.
So let's, I mean, this is a difficult comparison maybe for people to visualize, but I think there's the accuracy side, which obviously has already been shown that AI is greater than this. But let's go towards the ATM versus bank teller side. So when you had to go to a bank teller and you had to wait online and you had to wait through 10 people and then go up there and do a transaction that ended up taking seconds to just go to a machine. I think eventually, 3 years from now, if you want to go get a complete body scan, MRI, which is now down to, in some places, $100, maybe there'll be an office where there's 50 of them. You go in, you have the work done, you leave immediately, and everything goes through an app that's to your phone. It speeds up how quickly you're getting your information. It helps you remain healthier because you do it once a year, you're getting a cancer scan, all of this stuff is coming, and it will make the medical side much more efficient. It'll make the user experience much more efficient, the accuracy much more efficient. And because it's a certainty that healthcare expenditures are going to continue to grow because of the demographics and because of the health of the country right now, I think you're going to see a lot of money put into this for this. So I think the experience that you're describing is one of the reasons why in the healthcare side, you want to invest in the sectors that are the most inefficient. You saw Musk say yesterday that he believes he can get $1 trillion out of spending out by May. Whether or not he can do that, he has looked at now for long enough. You want to look at the most inefficient parts of the economy where they are making money and have revenue coming in. Healthcare is an obvious one. And that's why I think as a sector, there's a very important story going here that fits into what you just described.
The other thing that feels pretty important is this new image generation that came out. We've got some folks who work with us who, they're getting very sophisticated on this and they're looking at it. And my takeaway was not, oh my God, all the designers are going to go away. My takeaway was everyone now is going to have maybe entry level or above capabilities of a designer at their fingertips. And the designers, they don't want to be doing low level, type work. They want to be worked on the highest use and best use of their skill set and their experience. And so what you're really doing is you're democratizing access to these skills. And one of the things that happened this week that just blew my mind is Amjad Masad, who is the founder and CEO of Replit, which many people use as kind of their entryway into coding. He said that a year ago, he used to tell everyone, learn to code. Now he's like, I actually don't think that you need to learn to code. I think you need to learn how to think very clearly and talk to the machines. And it feels like, oh, maybe what we're actually doing with all this AI stuff is we're taking skill sets and we're able to very quickly import them into different people who wouldn't have to go through the hours, months, years of training. But if you now all of a sudden can type into a screen and it can generate a design image, it can generate code, it can do this what is the productivity boom? Everyone's worried about the contraction of oh my God, people are going to lose their jobs. Of course, there will be some shift in, kind of employment. But actually, the way bigger story is the productivity boom, in my opinion. Yeah.
And so I've talked about Replit and Cursor, and I remember Shane was outside. We talked about it before I left last week. My experience on this, and the one part I would say, I completely agree. I don't know how to code, but what I do know how to do after my 5 coding classes is move through the terminal on my computer. I can build things by taking Python code and bringing it in and running it. What Replit and Cursor allowed me to do is create applications and to go through the thinking. So on your first point about the design side, I've said this to everyone because I write a lot of content. AI cannot write the content that I do because the most important thing is connecting the dots in the thought process of what to write about, not just with understanding the users, what they want to read, what's topical, what do people want to see? AI embodiment is an easy one. People love humanoids. They love the thought process. But if I'm going to write a paper on something a little bit more about the markets, the creativity of how I connect that back to a story is very hard. And I have yet to use AI for the thinking part. So prompts are really critical to go through and create, and how you create a prompt. I've been teaching people how I do my own prompts to get more research out. So I think it's giving you more time for critical thinking. You're getting rid of the mundane task. It's doing all the work. And Replit is a perfect example of